Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to episode number 4 of Institute for the Future's online collaboration series. I'm your host and fellow student, Mark Fraunfelder. I'm the editorial director and research director here at IFTF. And before I introduce my guest, I want to let you know that you're more than welcome to ask questions as we go along. And if something piques your interest and you want more information, the best way to ask a question is to use the Q&A button that's at the bottom of the Zoom window. And if you move your cursor into the Zoom window, you will see a small icon that says Q&A, and there's 2 little word balloons there. Just click it and enter your question there. That's the best way. We'll be sure to see it that way. It lines up in a queue. It's really automated and it's very cool. And I'm thrilled to introduce you to our guest today, Tara Brown. Tara is a technologist, a STEAM educator, an author. She develops programs at the intersection of environment, education, and well-being. She's been a friend of mine for many years now, and we're going to talk about new values of technologies that connect us in uncertain times. Hey, Tara, how are you?
Ohayou gozaimasu. I'm good. Thank you for
Good.
having me.
Yeah, Ohayou gozaimasu means good morning in Japan, and it's morning in Tokyo there. So thank you so much for waking up early for us for this. What time is it there? 9-ish, 9 a.m.?
9, so not so
Okay,
early.
not too bad. It's beautiful. You have a beautiful view there of,
Yep.
we were talking a little bit of the cherry blossom tree behind you, filled with little birds. So
Mm-hmm.
beautiful location. Tara, I thought a good way to get started, you're just such an interesting person. You've done so many things. Tell us a little bit about your background and some of the things that you've worked on over the years.
Sure. Well, in the very beginning, I started out in software development, both as a developer and as a product manager. And I did that for many, many years at different organizations, including Microsoft, some startups such as Topspin Media, even Shazam. And then around 2010, when my son was born, that's when I transitioned into education. And that was really through the Los Angeles Makerspace. One of the founders of that. It's a nonprofit organization. And that's also when I really got into hardware. So since then, I also worked at places like UC Irvine on what's called interest-driven learning or connected learning, and it's sort of how kids learn online. And so that continued for many years. And then in 2014, I started a company called KitHub. And essentially it was an answer to what a lot of teachers and librarians and other educators were asking me and my co-founder, which is, okay, you're doing all this cool makerspace stuff, but how do we do this in the classroom or an out of school location? And so I want to kind of expand outside what we were doing in the nonprofit world to bring that to more people. So that's really what I've been doing since 2014 is hands-on education, but also online interest-driven learning.
Okay. I just have to share a funny story about LA Makerspace, which was the makerspace you founded, which was such a cool place and like a hub for people to learn interesting things. This was several years ago. You asked me to give a workshop on Arduino, which is an
Mm-hmm.
electronics prototyping platform. And so I came up with a number of different circuits that people could build and try things out. I sent them to you, and you said, I think there's probably like 50 people who are signed up. So I want someone to help you out. And you introduced me online to this fellow by the name of Quinn. So I said, hey, Quinn, talking to him by email, and I sent him the schematics and some of the code that I was using for the Arduino. And he wrote back, he's like, yeah, these are okay, but really the circuit should look like this. This is the wrong resistor. And he's like fixing everything up. And I'm like, Quinn, I'm really, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to meeting you and stuff. And so I show up and I'm expecting Quinn to be like, this college student or somebody who's like in his 20s or something. And here is, can you see that right there?
Yeah,
There's Quinn.
there he is.
He is like 11 years old. And I'm like, whoa. I said, Quinn, you're the one who's been sending me all this stuff. He's like, yeah. And he was there with his parents. And he actually, at the time when he's like 11, he had a company called Q
Hmm.
Tech Now. And those you can see there, those are little devices that he created that are add-ons to the Arduino.
Yeah.
And if you looked at his site, the only way you could tell that this company was being run by an 11-year-old is that product on the lower right-hand corner is a fart detector.
Yeah. Put it in his
That's
dad's back pocket.
yeah, exactly. And it was so funny. I was talking to his parents. They're both like pediatricians, and I'm like, Quinn is amazing. And they're like, we have no idea what he's doing. We just like kind of like just let him do his thing. But anyway, LA
Oh,
Makerspace was
Quinn.
such a cool place. I loved it. And so one of the things that you are involved with now is Safecast, an
Hmm.
organization that I am familiar with. We've covered it in Institute for the Future's Future Now magazine before. Tell us about Safecast, its origins, and kind of its unique origins. It's kind of a uh, both sides of the Pacific kind of a organization, and they're doing some really
Yeah.
interesting work, especially now.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so Safecast, before Safecast, in March of 2011, there was the sort of trifecta disaster that happened in Japan, where there was an earthquake, a tsunami, and then the Fukushima nuclear plant meltdown. And during that time, there were a bunch of friends all over the world that were wondering what's happening in Japan right now. Are people okay? How do we figure this out? And a lot of those people had some sort of a connection to Japan, whether they had family there or they worked there at some point in time or just love of the culture. And so they just started messaging each other to try to figure it out. And eventually, they connected with some people that were in Japan, including people at hackerspaces like the Tokyo Hackerspace, and said, look, we are not getting the information that we need right now from the radiation monitoring stations that the government has up. They're not really getting any information to people very timely. We're wondering, what do we do? And so what they decided to do was to go start collecting radiation data themselves using Geiger counters. At the time, though, became very difficult to purchase any of these Geiger counters because, just like toilet paper, they were sold out. And the other thing is with the Geiger counters is like they're sort of just static. They weren't sharing information. So what was happening too with the government is they'd have their big Geiger counters and they'd walk around and take readings and write it down on their little, boards and, eventually share the information.
Mhm.
So that
Slow
was
and
really what,
inefficient.
right. And so they're like, we can do this better. And because they were also sort of had that maker sort of ethos, they said, okay, let's just put something together and try. So they started hacking together their own Geiger counters and driving around with them and collecting data and just kept iterating and iterating and iterating on it. So eventually they were putting this information onto a map to share it. So everybody could see what their readings were. And they also started actually teaching the people in Fukushima and other places how they could build their own Geiger counters too. Because, one of the things I think that happens is when there's a disaster, sometimes there's this idea from people outside that the people facing that disaster are all of a sudden helpless and can't do anything, where that is not the case usually. And so they're like, look, like let's work with the people who live there and who are invested in like really getting this information as quickly as possible so that they can make the right decisions for themselves and their families and their communities. And so like, yeah, pretty quickly they really, covered a lot of ground there. And eventually they discovered that the map of what the radiation readings were that was provided or even guesstimated a lot by the government were not completely accurate and actually quite different. So in some cases, people that were evacuated maybe didn't need to be, and some people that weren't maybe should have been. So it was a big deal, or it still is a big deal. And, there came a point where the government finally said, look, yeah, we are going to also use these readings and we're going to participate in this. And so Japan Post they are on these little scooters, the post people, and we have Geiger counters on these scooters and drive them around and collect readings, or and now it's, these Geiger counters are all over the world, right? So it's not just Japan. There's people who've gone near Chernobyl and different places, even, in California there collecting data. So they have, I think they're one of the biggest citizen science projects in the world. They have Safecast has more radiation readings than publicly available than I think all governments combined. It's a big project, and all through volunteers that started at the beginning just asking questions and wanting to get open, publicly available, transparent data.
Yeah, and I think it's the little device is called the BGeigie. It's
Hmm.
about like the size of a little lunch box or something. It contains a Geiger counter, the GPS unit, a controller. Maybe was it an Arduino in the early
Yeah,
days?
there's Arduino Fio. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you can just put this in a little bag and hang it outside your car. And as you drive around, it takes readings. And
Yeah.
then this map, I encourage everyone to go to safecast.org and take a look at this beautiful map that shows data all over the world of radiation readings. Really interesting things. I think one of the interesting things is in Los Angeles on the Pacific Coast Highway near Santa Monica, there's an area that looks like it's kind of high, and it's because the tile that's lining the tunnel has higher than
Mm.
normal radiation, higher than background. I think it's harmless, uh, really, but it's interesting to see. And how many? There's like 100 million measurements at this
Yeah,
point, if not more.
more now.
Crazy,
It says
yeah.
on the website where we're at, it just ticks up all the time because people are continually taking readings all the time. And also on the map now too, you can see some of the static air quality monitoring stations
Hmm.
that have been deployed too, because that's the sort of next stage with Safecast, is to look at particulate matter in different parts of the world. And LA is one of the
Yeah.
places they started.
Right. Yeah. These are devices that are mounted on tripods, and volunteers have them in their backyards and various places all over the world. And they're measuring particulate matter of different diameters,
Yeah.
radiation, a few other things, I think. And that all goes to the map as well. And the other thing is, I just want to kind of stress that this is like a real DIY citizen science effort. And a lot of attention was paid to the quality of the Geiger counters that were being used. The data has been proven to be really reliable.
Right.
Scientists consider it gold standard kind of data. If the Japanese government had decided to do this as a project on their own, imagine how much it would have cost, how slow it would have been. This was
Right.
people like just getting together, collaborating uh, on in Los Angeles and Tokyo and all over the world to do something inexpensively, quickly, and in a way that's very rigorous. This
Hmm.
is like there's a lot of rigor in the process. And so what you're doing now at Safecast is really interesting with COVID-19 information. Can you talk a little bit about that?
With the COVID-19 map that Safecast put together was really about people being able to tell their stories about whether they could get tested or not, what that was like for them. It was like kind of saying, people are more than bar graphs and, spreadsheets and all these things that keep getting shared around. Like there's real people behind that with real experiences. And also it's like kind of this, sort of a historical journal in a lot of ways. Like in that time, what was that like for people? And I think also it lets you kind of relate when you can see on a map, oh, this person is in this city. I know that city. I maybe even know that particular area of the city, and this is what's happening for them. And so it was really, one of different projects that Safecast is sort of working on right now to be helpful during this time, was sort of putting that sort of voice to these experiences. And so, yeah, anybody can post anonymously what their experience is, and so they're on the map, and it's a different way to share and see what's happening.
Yeah, and again, it's based on this map that it's just another layer on this amazing map of crowdsourced data, and it's a way for people to collaborate. It's like kind of giant online collaboration that
Hmm.
touches the physical world. Could you talk a little bit about how Safecast in particular collaborates, being a distributed company and they span time zones? I know because I am involved with your Slack group that I see that there's a lot of activity on Slack. Do you have, is this something that just kind of organically, like a process for you to get things done using Slack, or uh, did you kind of have some thought in place to make it a useful tool for you to collaborate?
Well, like Safecast was always distributed from the very beginning before, it was Safecast. And
Hmm.
so it's just something that it's always been part of how the organization works, or, even with the volunteers. And so, Slack, we've been using Slack for quite a long time now. Maybe even since Slack started, maybe I'd have to
Hmm.
go check. I feel like I
Uh-huh.
can't even actually remember a time when I wasn't chatting using Slack, honestly.
Hmm.
And I think like the thing about Slack that it's nice is because multiple projects are happening with Safecast, it lets you easily kind of filter out and decide what you want to participate in depending on what your interest is. So if you're interested in air quality, you can be part of that conversation, or the radiation monitoring, or just brainstorming. That's something that you can easily participate in. There's also a Google group for people who are not involved in Slack, and that's
Hmm.
more like if you're somebody that say has a Geigy or
Hmm.
one of the early air quality prototypes, then you can ask questions on the Google group, and that's something that you can kind of do sort of FAQs or Q&A, that sort of thing. Whereas the Slack group, I mean, Slack is invite only at some,
Hmm.
and I think it's we sort of talk about this idea. There's people who like do a lot of talking and a lot of doing, during any of these kinds
Uh-huh.
of situations. And so it's the doers that are really, in the Slack group. So they
Hmm.
get invited by existing people that are in Slack doing stuff, and they feel like here's more people that want to participate and do. It goes back really to that DIY maker ethos, open, all those kinds of things, to say, look, we're here to collaborate and share ideas, but ultimately we want to try doing things and not just wait around.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious in knowing why you think Slack works so well for you. I've participated in Slack groups for a lot of different things, and I would say a good 80% of them fizzle out and stop.
Mm-hmm.
But this
Yeah.
actually seems to be very active. Every day I go on there and there's lots of activity. It's high quality. There's like a high signal to noise ratio. What do you think uh, is it about the behavior of the participants that makes it so useful for you?
Well, I was recently invited to a Slack group for something that was happening in Australia with the bushfires.
Hmm.
And so I was really kind of comparing those two experiences very recently. And that was very different because it was like a flood of people who didn't know each other at all, or maybe in
Hmm.
some cases they did, but generally didn't, from all over the world, coming in saying, I want to help, I want to help, I have ideas, right? And very quickly it looked like it was pretty unmanageable, because there wasn't really any sort of guidelines about how to participate in that group. And a lot of there's marketing happening, like, hey, how can I, benefit from this for my company?
Mhm.
Or like, ooh, maybe there's an IP thing here I need to worry about, so it's just like, okay, I don't know. Like, I mean, I think some good came out of it, like, I don't want to disparage that effort by any means, but I just could see the clear difference. And so that kind of goes back to with the Safecast Slack, that sort of filtering happens before you even are in the Slack group, right? Like, these
Mhm.
are people who we know or, capable of already, like, they're just kind of like, we're going to do stuff, we're open. There's this idea, like, if you're going to participate, everything is open. We Safecast is CC0, like, you don't even need to do any attribution or anything, like, just use whatever it is that,
Mhm.
the group comes up with. There's no marketing or selling or any of that stuff. I mean, it's not to say that people, if they're doing something really wonderful, there's not, sharing will happen, right? But yeah, and I think that there's the high quality information is because um, that, I think a lot of people in the group understand, like, what Howard Rheingold calls this, like, crap detection. Like, I've
Mhm.
taken, I don't know if you know Howard Rheingold, but he
He
has
was
this great
actually the
course.
first guest on our on the
Oh, was he?
series.
Okay, I need to
Yeah.
go back and watch Howard. So I took a long time ago this his crap detector course. And it was maybe the best, if you can, like, if there's a link to it or something, I highly
Oh,
recommend,
cool.
watching it, because that was something that I share with others,
Mhm.
that, and precision questioning and using critical thinking skills and all those kinds of things. And I think, being able to call someone out in a very kind way if they share something questionable,
Mhm.
like, okay, I see where maybe you're sharing this thing, but here's some alternative ideas around that. Because it's not like, we're all human and we can make mistakes. Obviously, this is the novel, coronavirus, we're still
Mhm.
all learning, but
Mhm.
we can learn from each other's experiences and stuff. And I think the other piece too is there's people from all different backgrounds, right? This is not all just people who are hardware hackers or software developers or something. Like, these are people who are professors of, anthropology, or, somebody who is maybe a chef or something, like, just different backgrounds completely. And I think that's where you get that 360-degree view of what's really happening and how people feel, especially too because they're from all over the world. So you're getting all these different perspectives and viewpoints, and that, I think, is really, really important, because you can do a lot of sharing, like, hey, this worked really well over here. Maybe it'll work over here, maybe it won't. And that is, I think, the other important piece is, like, nothing is, like, precious. There are no ideas that are like, like, you got to let go of your ego. And, like, that is not going to work in any of this, right?
Mhm.
Like, you can't let go of your ego. There's nothing precious. You got to be cool if we're going to move on to something else. And, as a group. So I think, like, all those things kind of just ingrained in the culture from the very beginning.
Mhm. So would you say that kind of knowing the people in advance, is that is that essential or important for effective Slack uh, utility?
I mean, in my opinion, in all Slack groups I've joined, the answer is yes.
Mhm.
Some
Mhm.
people definitely need to know each other. I think that vetting, or even like an endorsement in some way, definitely helps.
Mhm.
Um, so, and also kind of having like a buddy system, right? So if I invite somebody to a Slack group, I'm like, hey, this is my pal, I'm bringing them in. This is what they're into, and just kind of being there for them as like a sort of to vouch for them, but also to invite them in so they feel welcome. I think that's just as important, right? So sometimes what happens with a lot of these groups is people keep just flooding in all the time. There's this open, like, join call that happens, and you lose track of who everybody is, and then you can't kind of do that pattern matching, which I think is really important. Like, oh yeah, like, okay, thanks for telling me about your friend and their skills and what they're into. This might be helpful for them because there's this other person over here, or this other organization. And so I think you need to have also some people who are really good at sort of that curating and pattern matching skill set to connect dots. And that's where I think that you can see more effective and more like quicker sort of group think, but also prototyping if that's what you want to do.
Hmm. Do you
Yeah.
use Zoom or any other kind of video conferencing for communicating with other team members for Safecast or your other projects to you know as well, or do you mainly stick to like text-based communication?
Oh, I'm in like so many groups, maybe too many. Well, as an educator, definitely Zoom. That
Mhm,
seems to be what people are using. And because they've had a lot of security privacy issues with Zoom, I have a
mhm,
lot of very concerned educators that I've been working with, including my mom, who's a
mhm,
high school counselor and with
mhm,
very vulnerable population. And this is very concerning for her. So
mhm,
I try really hard to keep on top of what's happening with Zoom so I can offer advice about what to do. Um, and and actually I'm helping like my Shingon Buddhism class get onto Zoom. So
mhm.
because people really want to try that out. So I'm helping them. So yeah, I mean, I think it just kind of some of my groups we use Zoom. With Safecast, it kind of just depends. It's we sometimes if people have iPhones, we'll FaceTime or Google Hangout, or it's not like this is the technology we're going to use right now. Some are very um, encryption is super important to some people, so you kind of have to be a little agile in how you want to communicate. But generally speaking, with Safecast, it's through Slack with
Mhm.
texting on there that we generally tend to do.
Okay. So LA Makerspace was such a great physical hangout place. And when I gave the Arduino class there, I think it was really helpful for me to actually like s- sit next to someone and look at their
Mm.
breadboard and the wiring and help them. Um, do you think that, I mean, both my daughters now are one's a college student, the other is high school. They're both taking their classes online now. Um, One of them loves it, the other one can't stand it. Do you think that online can be a substitute for uh, online for learning, or are there limitations that can never be overcome?
I've been thinking about this a lot. I have a 10-year-old and he hasn't played with another kid for I think 6 weeks now. So
Wow.
me and my husband are his playmates and our
Hmm.
cat. And I mean, at first, I think he was delighted by not having to go to school. you know, he probably has learned more playing, different things in Minecraft. He bakes every single day. I see, he's able to pursue his interests, kind of going back to the interest-driven learning work that I do, in a way that he's leveled up so quickly that would never have happened if he was still, going to school. Um, in the physical sense. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely concerned for kids that, especially like kids that don't have siblings, to not have anyone to play with and be a kid. And you online cannot replace that, right? I mean, like I have a lot of friends that are homeschool parents, and I've been talking to them a lot about what I can do to provide more activities for my son, because he's basically done his schoolwork by noon every day,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so we're trying to balance like, okay, I want to do some work, but I need to be here for him. And what can I do? And I don't want to be him being in front of a screen all the time. And hence, this empty lot right here, we're hanging out in their lot. We just did a scavenger hunt. um but I think we have to figure out ways to get around that. And so I am grateful. I mean, for people that do have internet and computers, yes, and you have, maybe you have things you can tinker at with home and learn online, and you can still have those hands-on activities. That's great, but it is not a replacement. I also think a lot about kids, with the LA Makerspace. It's partnered with the Los Angeles Public Library and LA County Library. There's a lot of kids that would go there after school, right? Like that's where they get their computer time, their internet access, and where they would have a place to be, and now, like, I don't know what's happening with those kids. I don't know what's happening to all like the people, adults and kids, that don't have internet access right now at
Mm-hmm.
all. So that's like one concern, is like the digital divide is more profound, obvious than it was before, but also like, what do we do, right? For these kids, they cannot be in front of screens all day, but also how do we make this easier for parents or guardians to do what they need to do also. So I think like there was, I've seen a lot of people saying like, look, like we cannot expect kids to just all of a sudden transition from what they've known where they go to school to online. Like it's not a one-to-one
No.
conversion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if this was something that was to say continue, a lot of kids are not going to even go back to school this year, right? And so if, let's say, it was to continue in the fall, like I think a lot of changes have to be done in like what the schooling really looks like for kids. Like for example, like how do we have PE and recess? Like I've been doing that with my kid, right? We do recess,
Mm-hmm.
we do hopscotch, or we go on this empty lot, we play, we take an online PE classes or
Mm-hmm.
dance or something. Like those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about. But also, going back to kind of like the hands-on maker stuff, like we can't just be doing online math and reading and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Like they have to have stuff away from these screens all the time.
Yeah. Well, that's a good transition to talk about some of the work you've been doing in recent years. And I've been kind of following your journey on this, and it's kind of like uh, forest medicine, which
Hmm.
I think is fascinating. Tell us a little bit about that, and was this for you a way to kind of uh, balance being online so much, and what is the benefits of forest medicine?
Yes. So when we moved to Japan in 2017, um, yeah, it was a bit of a bumpy road for me, honestly, moving over here and being away from, everything really, like the LA Maker space, my colleagues, my friends. Um, and that's when, I started saying, okay, I want to immerse myself in Japanese culture. I want to get to better at the language, and what is Shinto? Like, what is all this? What are kamis, these gods? Like, what is all this stuff? Like, this seems kind of fun. So, um, then as part of that research, that's when I learned about the Shinrin Yoku, which is the forest bathing, which, I think a lot of people have probably heard about it by this time, where the idea is that you go into nature without really a plan. It's not an A to B, it's not a hike. It's get out there and enjoy it, and be in the moment, be present, all that kind of mindfulness meets nature. And it actually really, it started by the Japanese government in the 80s, where they were seeing fewer Japanese people going out into the countryside, into nature, and they really wanted more people to get out there. And they started doing research into the benefits of doing these sort of forest bathing exercises. And they ended up opening up, I think it's 64 certified forest medicine bases in Japan, where they have certain criteria to actually be certified base. Like you have to have a certain number of kilometers of walk. I think it's 5 kilometers of path. It can't be too steep. It has to have a certain tree coverage, low noise pollution, light pollution, air quality has to be good. So there's like this list of criteria. And some of them actually will take your cortisol level readings and your blood pressure and so forth at the base before you go out for your forest bathing. And so I was very intrigued by this, and I started contacting two authors of Shinrin Yoku books in Japan, and one of them is Dr. King Lee. And I ended up going and interviewing him. He's a medical doctor at Nippon University. And I just went and interviewed him just because I was curious and interested. And that's when he was telling me that he was conducting forest medicine seminars and workshops. And I thought, oh, that sounds good. I'm going to do that. So I signed up and I went. And yeah, it was really like how we learned how to guide people, what they call forest medicine. And really the difference between forest bathing and forest medicine is taking your those readings I mentioned, like, and just measuring your sort of like health benefits before and after. So like, what is your mood before you go on the walk and you do this PALMS test, like asking you questions about how you feel, and afterwards. And then there's certain ways that you sort of little tiny exercises you do along the way, like looking at light filtering through trees and that kind of thing. So yeah, I loved it. It was wonderful. So yeah, I'm certified in that now, and it paired really nicely with something else I did, which is I learned how to be a mountain monk, Yamabushi, which was much more intense training that I'd done the summer before that, which was really meditative and sort of combined Shinto and Buddhism in that practice. So I mean, really, it came down to, yeah, it was a way for me to extend that mindfulness practice I already had, learn more about Japanese culture, and just my general love of being, in natural settings and wanting to understand how to have a better sort of connection to nature, as opposed to being sort of, here's humans, here's nature, let's go visit it sometimes,
So, how have you taken kind of what you've learned from, having a really like high tech kind of life, Safecast work, doing software development, LA Makerspace, and then your work with nature and forest medicine, and being an Earth Charter educator, taking all that into consideration and looking at where we are now with this COVID-19 pandemic. What can we learn about what to do after this pandemic has subsided, hopefully soon, in the coming months? But what can we learn? What do you see as a path that would take us to a better place?
Yeah, I think, things that I learned being in Japan, for one, is just this idea of we are part of nature. We're part of that ecosystem. We are not separate from it. We're not above it. We are part of it. And that is something that, I really see as a big difference between sort of Eastern versus Western, where, in Canada, where I grew up, you think of nature as recreation. We're going to go skiing and canoeing and kayaking. We're going to go hiking and doing all these things. But then if you look at the First Nations people, in Canada, they have a much more integrated idea of what it means, and sort of protect those spaces so that we have them going forward, for the next generation, for, my kid and your kids. And so I guess I really hope that we are paying attention more to the people like the First Nations, Indigenous people, who seem to be the best protectors in a lot of ways about, all these natural spaces, and learn from them. But also, I think, like, there's an really good example that I learned when I was watching a talk at the UBC Forestry School in Vancouver. They were doing a seminar, and there was a representative from a First Nations tribe there, and he said, they have a really nice pairing between what their elders know and their wisdom, and some like and scientists, and what they've learned, and then having a really nice balanced pairing between those two to make changes, and put open public data out there about what they're learning. And I think like that, going to sort of the Earth Charter, and that framework, that's kind of what it talks about too, is like we can't forget what people have learned through experience and time, just because we have science now, right? Like there's
Hmm.
still so much to learn. And so I would like to see more balance, really. It feels like it's just like a lot of this right now, when I think we can embrace both things and find a way forward through that. And I think part of that too is education. I was talking to my mom about this. Like I mentioned, she's an educator in British Columbia, and she's looking up this curriculum that kids are learning right now, and she's like, it's just the same stuff. Like, we have this opportunity right now to show them relevant information about what's happening to them right now. And so I think we need to figure out a way to be a little more agile in what kids are learning, so that they can be a part of this. I mean, and like we hear this from kids in the maker world all the time. Like, I want to work on something that's meaningful, that's relevant. Like, I can
Hmm.
contribute now. I don't have to wait till I'm an adult or in college to contribute. Like, look at Quinn. Like, that's a perfect example. There's like, I met him when he was 10 years old. How old my
Hmm.
kid is now, and he's continued to contribute through, he's in college now. So I think like that's the thing, is like, let kids participate now, help them learn now, give them the resources they need so they can be empowered to do these things. And that also goes to educators too. And like, what is an educator really? I mean, all these parents now who are like, well, I'm not an educator, I can't do this. Well, you always have been, and maybe you might think of yourself as perhaps a teaching assistant, but you are. And we need to help parents with that just as much as the traditional formal teachers,
Hmm.
that we need for our kids.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and that's a great way, I think, to conclude this. Um, we will have links, Tara, to all of the things that you're working on, by going to iftf.org/online collaboration series. You'll be able to rewatch this video. You'll be able to see all the links to the work you've done, the cool new COVID-19 information that safecast.org has launched, I think just last week. Tara, this has been a real pleasure catching up with you again. Thank you so much.
ありがとうございました。Thank you.
Doitashimashite.
Thank you so much.
Matane, Tara. Thank you so much.
Metsukudate.
So we will return in, I believe, 2 weeks. And you can go to iftf.org/online collaboration series, find out about our next guest, and looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you, everybody. Thanks again, Tara. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.